Hello, everybody. Welcome to Ask an Expert. It is, it's Wednesday evening in the United States. It's Thursday morning in Australia, which is where our guest, Natasha Gunston, is joining us from. You also get a bit of an announcement. If you haven't looked at the Ride IQ website anyways, you get a bit of an announcement right now, which is that Natasha will be our next official Ride IQ coach. She's an accredited exercise physiologist and has some amazing sessions that we'll be adding to the app. And today we're talking about rider physiology and how you can achieve your peak performance as a rider and improve your overall health. So with that, Natasha, we're so excited to have you on Ask an Expert. Thank you for joining us bright and early.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm really excited.
So where in Australia are you?
So I live in Brisbane, so in sunny Queensland. It is winter here at the moment, but we still are gifted with nice warm weather. And I've lived here my whole life.
Really? And tell
Yeah.
us about your path as an exercise physiologist, because I know you didn't start right off in the horse world, but I'm sure that horses have been woven through your life too. So if you wouldn't mind,
Yeah.
tell us a bit of that story and kind of how you got to where you are today.
I won't bore you going right back to the start, but I've had horses in my life. I was born into horses. Mum's always been horsey and threw me on a horse right from a young age. And I don't even know when I started the obsession with eventing. I grew up watching badminton and just got hooked from there. And it was no other discipline for me. Eventing was it. But I always loved sport and movement. Maybe not the most athletic person, and maybe not always good at everything. But Mum reiterated to me early on in life that you don't have to be good at everything. That like there are things that you can focus on. So she really pushed that. If I really loved horses, then I can try to improve myself there, and I don't have to be the best runner, because coming last at sports day every year probably wasn't the most promising thing for your confidence. But I realized that there are things you can do to enable better confidence, but also specialize in certain other areas. So I really pushed for working out how I could become a better rider and things like that, even from an early age, and realized that I can work on myself physically to help with that. But always had a passion for sports, for movement, and that's where I went off to uni and did my Bachelor of Clinical Exercise Physiology. And I started off working in chronic disease management, so working with all sorts of range of people, from musculoskeletal conditions to neurological conditions, cardiac conditions. And then I went off and I specialized in cardiac rehabilitation. So I worked with clients post-heart attack, post-bypass surgery, and trying to restore their life and their well-being post significant health effect. So they had life-changing experiences, and trying to enable them the tools to manage themselves and have better well-being after that, and almost give themselves a second life. So getting them back to their normality of being able to walk from the kitchen to the bathroom, or walk, carry their tea and things like that we take for granted every day, that we just do, that is a big thing for them, and getting them back to that normality, and utilizing exercise as not only just a management tool, but as a big promoter of health, and how it can help you physically, mentally, emotionally, and all those sorts of things as well. So exercise has played a big role in my life, both personally, but also with a lot of my clientele and things that I do and I promote over the last few years. And then slowly but surely specialized a little bit more into riders, and got more of that interest. It's always been, as I said, a personal interest point for me to improve my riding. And then just started to work a little bit more with some clients that I had in the clinic that I was working at, and they were riders, and friends would start to see me, and it just sort of progressed from there, and it's done its general progression, and I started to see people on the horse and assess them both in and out of the saddle, and it just spiraled. And then, of all things that you do during COVID, you decide that you're going to start a business, but that's usually not the most great business plan, but it actually worked. And since there, last last 2.5, 3 years, I haven't looked back, and I absolutely love what I do and working with people every day and just getting optimal performance for riders, and that benefit that it then has onto the horse as well. And I think that's the big take home. A lot of people see when they start working on themselves that huge improvement that the horse gets out of it, but then also the huge improvement they personally feel out of the saddle as well. So that benefit and that improved, as I said before, mental and emotional health as well. So it's a big thing that I advocate for.
That's amazing. That is a really, I mean, every part of that story has a lot of like inspirational aspects to it, both on your side and your client side. And in different ways, of course, when you're helping people with like who have just had a major cardiac event or have had a chronic disease that you're helping rehab them from, and riders, like it's different, but there's so much inspirational personal development happening through all of that. And I'm sure just the role that you're playing in people's lives is so significant. Kinsey talked to me once when she had a physical therapist who was helping her with issues she was having with her shin. And just like even that was a life-changing impact for her. So that's all to say, I really admire the work that you do, and your passion really comes through in oh, I was in what you put out there, which I also meant to mention. You're on social media. It's the Eventing Physiologist. So anybody who is watching right now or listening after the fact, take your phone out and make sure that you follow Natasha, because she has great content on social as well. And that will give you a bit of a peek into her business, even more so than we can in this conversation today. But Natasha, one thing that I really appreciate about your approach and your why behind your business is the overall life benefits that people can get from exercise and from having like a more holistic approach to their own health rather than a means to an end. Like I want to do this thing so that I can have a better dressage test or whatever the desired outcome is. Will you talk more about that?
Well, I guess we always would love a better dressage test, but sometimes it's more than that, isn't it? It's about that day in, day out. You know, we as riders, we know it's not about just the competition on the weekend. It's about the grueling slog we do every day of the week. It's not only the work we do in the saddle, it's everything we do out of the saddle. And then for amateurs as well, it's the things that they do throughout the week that then can make a big difference on their riding. So even work, we have to pay for the horses somehow. So it's whether they've got a laboursome job, whether they've got a sedentary job, all those sorts of things that exercise can then benefit them from not only in the saddle, but actually benefit them out of the saddle, make them feel better, have more energy, and be able to put a better step forward every day, and hopefully help feel better overall. And don't get me wrong, we're going to have our days that we're tired and we're allowed to have days off and all those sorts of things, but it's trying to benefit ourselves in the long run, where we don't want to just be here for tomorrow. We want to be here and benefiting ourselves for an extended period of time, and we really want to make the most of that. We want to have good wellness for an extended period of time as well, and that's a big thing to remember. So one of my taglines that's on my my website, which is probably one of my favorite things, is each day is a new opportunity to benefit yourself, so make the most of it. So it's a big thing that I try to reiterate. It's never too late to start, and you have a new opportunity every day to better yourself, and you can really promote that through just small changes. And it doesn't have to be drastic. It doesn't mean that every day you have to start going to the gym for 60 minutes and then you have to meditate for 3 hours and you've got to do all these sorts of things, drink 3 liters of water. It's not that at all. It's about making small positive changes every day that can benefit you in the long run, and surrounding yourself with people that are very similar to that and have a good support network around you and all of those sorts of things. I think it can really just make a big difference in your life. And as I said before, it can then make a big difference into your horse's life and your performance, and then that makes you feel better as well. It's this fastidious circle that keeps patting you on the back.
I love that approach, and it's something like the small changes I think is so key because it can be so easy to be like, "Oh, I should start like a 12-week super intense like training program and like today is the day." And then like today comes and it's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm too tired," or like there's like a million reasons not to get started.
Yeah.
So I love that. I found that like for me, I always tell myself like if I'm 10 minutes into my workout and I'm still like I do not want to be here, then I can leave. But like the majority of the time, once you're 10 minutes in, like that's you're like, okay, fine, I'll finish. I'll do another 20 minutes or whatever it is. So like
Yeah.
that is always good to have those little things to give yourself an out if you need it. But it can be like even 10 minutes. It's better than zero.
Absolutely. And quite often I'll give my clients a little bit of homework and I'll go, I'm going to give you one or two exercises and that's going to be the things that and have a reason for that and go, this is helping you with blah. And so it gives them a motivator and a reason, but making it really achievable. And then the more things are achievable, the more you're doing them and completing them, the better you're ticking that box. You feel more motivated because you're doing that. And then it helps motivate you even more. So it's like that self intrinsic motivation rather than waiting for external forces to tell you what to do and to try to motivate you as well.
Natasha, what are some examples of those like really attainable goals that people could set for themselves? Or I know there's probably a million that you've given to clients, but just maybe a handful to get listeners thinking about what maybe they could take on as their attainable goal today or this week.
So big thing even is just looking at how much movement they're doing throughout the day. So our phones tend to have our step count. We tend to always have our phones on us. So even looking at how many steps we're doing. So, and I don't mean to set a number and go from there and go, oh, you've got to reach 10,000 steps. Have a look at how much you've done for the last week, average it, and then try to just do that little bit more. So whether that's an extra 500, an extra 1,000 steps, and just aiming yourself with that small goal to build on, that's a good start. Even just having a glass next to the sink in the morning and you've got to start your day off by just having that small glass of water before you have your coffee and things like that. Like, don't get me wrong, we all need our coffee, but having that glass of water just to start with to make sure that you're just thinking about hydration. Or simple cases, you can get the water bottles now that have the times on them, and then you set yourself like you're sitting there right next to you on your desk at work and you watch it as you're drinking and you go, oh, hold on, it's 10 o'clock and I haven't drunk my 8 o'clock water. And it's simple things that we probably go, oh, whatever, but it actually can motivate you or just be a gentle reminder. It's setting a little move buzz on your watch or on your laptop or wherever you are to get up and move every half hour, an hour. And I know that sometimes isn't achievable at work, but if you set it that you think even just setting your posture and go, oh, lift your chest, eyes up, just moving around in your chair, giving yourself a little wriggle. You don't have to get up out of your chair, but just changing position can help you just feel a little bit better, opens your lungs up. Even doing some breathing techniques every 20 minutes, half hour, just take a few good big deep breaths in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. That sort of box breathing, really good to get that deep diaphragmatic, deep basal breathing. They're all really handy things you can do. And then even in your chair, just hopping up and down a couple times in a row, doing a squat into the chair, getting your legs moving and getting the blood pumping. And as you said before, Kinsey, it's sort of, once you actually get moving, you start to go, oh, well, I'm already moving, so I might as well do a little bit more. And so while one exercise might kick you off, that then can be a motivator, and then you just hit the ground running and you go, okay, cool, I'll do a bit more. Or I've actually got 15 minutes now I can do, and you then can continue to progress through and continue with it.
I love those ideas. I don't know who it was that convinced me that these small goals are worthwhile. I used to be like, I used to be kind of the opposite of what Kinsey was talking about. Like, unless I'm running a 5K, I'm not doing it, or doing the full workout or whatever it is. Tony, like Coach Tony Sandoval, who you know as well and have worked with as well, is also an advocate for that. But now my life is just so different. Like every morning, my goal is to walk to a tree with my dogs. The tree is within eyesight. Like, it is not a big accomplishment, but it feels like an accomplishment in my mind. And then it kind of like gets the ball rolling in the right direction. So that's all I was going to add to that. Kinsey, I know you probably had a question ready.
And my dog just started barking, so I might have to hand it back to you if he doesn't stop. Yeah. So okay, I love this path that we're on with this line of questions. So one thing I'd love to hear from you, Natasha, is like, where should somebody start? Like, if they're maybe with the client's first interaction with you, what do you have them do to like really assess where they're at, and how can somebody recreate that on their own?
So I guess the biggest thing is having open honesty about where you're at, and not being either embarrassed or feeling like you're not doing enough. So going, if you're not currently exercising and you work a sedentary job and you might ride your horse once or twice a week, that's absolutely fine. That's why we're here. Where you've taken that step to start. So owning up to the fact of what you're doing and having that honesty, it's then transparent between you and whoever you're seeing. So whether that be myself, whether that be Coach Sando, whether that be whoever it is that's a health professional, but being able to go, okay, this is where I'm at, but that doesn't mean that's where you're going to stay. So remembering that and going, okay, so I might be at a low level and really starting off here, and having your expectations be that it's going to take time, just like we do with riding. And a big thing of what I remind people is, you don't just grab a thoroughbred off the track and then suddenly be at 4-star. You work your way, you work on those foundations, and it might be a little bit boring to start with. It might be really basic, but it is worth taking the time and slowly build those foundations at the start in order to get the best benefit long-term, the best long-term changes, and hopefully the best result in the end. So that's the big thing that I try to push, is that it will be a bit boring, it will be a bit mundane, but it's so much more beneficial you doing and spending the time there to start with and building up. But if you're looking for somebody, you've got to find somebody that you connect with. So somebody that understands what you do, has a very similar personality, I find really helpful, because you don't want to go and see somebody, whether it be online, whether it be listening to their voice in your ears, whether it be going to see them in person, and you have a bit of a personality clash, and that's understandable, because we're not going to work well with others, and you want them to understand you best. So it's really good that you try to find somebody that looks like you fit in. And I don't mind openly saying this. Like, if you're looking for somebody to work with, go and stalk them. Go on their Instagram, their business account. Go on the website. Usually there'll be a blurb there, and you'll sort of get an understanding of what they're like, and that might really reiterate to you and help you work that out. And if you're not willing to start with someone, then even going back onto the social media, as much as I don't want you to just suddenly start something without getting assessed and making sure it works for you, but you might pick one exercise up off something, whether that be off a blog online, or whether that be off the Ride IQ app, or off someone's social media, and you choose that one exercise and you start with that. And you go, okay, I'm going to better myself with this, and then build on from there. You realize that actually you really like that programming on that training that person does as well. It's really important. But the other big thing that I reiterate to people is, it's about finding what modality of exercise you enjoy. So for some people, they love yoga. For others, that's not really their cup of tea. So I love a bit of everything. I love going for a run. I love lifting weights. I love doing Pilates. I like a little bit of meditation myself personally. So I just do a bit of everything, because that's just who I am. But I've got some other riders that, if I even look at saying the word yoga or a meditation, they're like, oh no. And so they love weights. So what I do is I work through the programming to make sure that there is some sort of flexibility focus in that strength training. I've got some people that, if I say even the word W and they go, oh my God, I'm not lifting weights, like that's not happening. And I'm like, it's okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to do blah. And I get them doing all these body weight exercise, which is just as beneficial, and they don't realize that they're strengthening themselves in that way. So it's about finding what they enjoy as well, what you personally enjoy. Some other people love going to classes. So they sign up for classes because it helps them motivate. They've signed up, they've paid for the class, they've got other people around them, and they go for that 45 minutes, and that's what works for them. Some people are really private and they love to exercise by themselves. That's a bit more me. I love to just go about and do my own thing and just work away at it by myself. I also don't like going for runs for people if they then make me look really slow. So that's yeah, I learned that early on in my relationship with my other half, that don't ever go for a run with him because he definitely doesn't make you feel that great about your little running steps. Anyway, I digress from that. Sorry, but it's really important to find what works for you, and that's not going to be the same as your best friend. As much as it'd be great, you could buddy system it up. You just might not like the same things, and being okay with that is important as well. You go, okay, cool, we can do our own things separately. Have our own separate programs, but we can still work out together if that's a good motivator as well.
Totally. When you're working with new clients, what are some of the common weaknesses you see for your riding clients that then you work together on addressing? Maybe like one or two common weaknesses you see, and then we can dive into like how we identify that, how we address that, etc.
Yeah. So there's a few things, but the biggest thing that I keep seeing time and time again is the hips and the pelvis. So big thing when I go and do my rider biomechanics assessments is the first thing that I look at is where they're sitting in the saddle, how they're sitting in the saddle, and whether there's an asymmetry of some kind. And I wouldn't know the exact statistic, but 9 times out of 10, I look there and there is some sort of asymmetry. The pelvis isn't sitting level. There's like maybe the pelvis is slightly shifted out one side. The rider sits heavier in one seat bone than the other. And it all starts from the hips and the pelvis. So we remember that the hips and the pelvis are two different things. So we've got the big pelvis itself, and then the hips that come out of it. Just hold on one sec. So this will be only helpful for those that have the video, but here is my little vertebrae. So we remember that the pelvis is this big structure here, and then the hip itself is this little structure into the ball and socket joint there. So a lot of people use the term interchangeably, but they're actually technically separate things. So we really want to make sure that we don't have to strengthen them separately by all means, but we want to make sure that we're finding out the exact cause of those weaknesses in particular. So quite often we tend to get really tight through the front of the pelvis, so through those pesky hip flexors, and they get a really bad rap all the time for being really tight, and everyone goes, oh my gosh, you've got to stretch them out, you've got to stretch them out, you've got to stretch them out. And you stretch and stretch and stretch, and they don't actually get any better. And they sometimes can get a little bit more cranky from you stretching them. And that's usually because they are so wound up and they're so tight because they're underdeveloped or they're weak, that then they're just tightening up even more. So my analogy of weak muscles or tight muscles is, imagine a rusty gate. It gets really tight and corrosive and you can't open the gate, and you've got to really reef it around. It's quite hard to create that movement. But the more and more you start to move it and utilize it, the easier it gets, and the more you can actually move through that range of motion or open the gate, so to speak. So the same thing goes a lot of the time with our muscles, is actually the more you're activating them and getting them utilizing both their contraction, so the concentric phase, and the eccentric phase, so that lengthening phase of the muscle movement, the better that they get of their flexibility. And so the more and more we're finding with the latest research and things, that actually static stretching is great, and it gets you a nice analgesic effect straight away. You feel a bit better acutely, but actually long term, we need to strengthen and engage that muscle and learn on and try to strengthen and lengthen the muscle at the same time. And that gives you better long-term benefits of that. So quite often, those pesky hip flexors at the front there are super tight. Same thing as the groin. It's really tight, really over dominant, and it starts to pinch in the saddle, and it doesn't let you sit deep into the saddle. And you get the knee starting to grip on a little bit. That lower leg becomes a lot more loose, and quite often we need to work on their dynamic engagement. So not just holding a static stretch. It does definitely help, but actually then engaging in and out of those positions to get the muscle engaging and relaxing. The biggest thing is if you've got a really tight muscle and then you're trying to pull that tight muscle apart or stretch it, it's really not going to let go, and it's probably going to pull even more. So by actually activating that muscle and then letting it relax, it has that better opportunity to let the muscle soften and stretch into whatever you're doing. So sometimes actually activating our muscle first and then stretching can have a little bit of a benefit, or as I like to put it more specifically, working in dynamic mobility and strengthening the muscle structures themselves has better long-term and sustainable benefits.
This is so interesting. And you guys, if you can watch the video, watch it, because I hope I'm not alone, but I just learned where my hip flexor is. I kind of thought my hip bones were what we were talking about, but where you pointed on is not what I thought. So that's very helpful. Will you describe?
Yeah, your hip flexors, there's plenty. There's a few. So you've got the main ones that actually, so if you're looking at your pelvis, so this is the front. You've got your main ones that actually come up through the front of your pelvis, this way, and they insert into sort of L4, L5. They come down through the front, and then they actually come, sorry, camera's terrible, and they come into the front of the pelvis here. You've also got a couple more that are a little bit more acute and sort of they're a little bit more superficial. You've got your one that you're probably talking about, which is right on the point of your hip, about here. That's really quite superficial, and that's your TFL. So it also gets a little bit overactive and overzealous when your glute med, so the glute medius on the side, which is a lateral stabilizer, doesn't work as well. So, or is a little bit weaker. So it tends to rely on the TFL and the hip flexor to sort of stabilize the pelvis a little bit, which it can do, but it's not its actual role. So that's a big thing. So pesky hip flexors and adductors, they tend to be a bit tight and a bit weak. So they're a big thing I like people to start with, and they often feel a lot better. And usually if we take a step back and we look at what you do day in, day out, so you're sitting most of the time. So your leg is in it and your hips are in a flex position. So they're sitting roughly at 90 degrees for most of the time, whether you're at work, whether you're in the car driving, and then you have a look at what you do. So you're walking and you're flexing through the hip as you walk. You're going upstairs, you're flexing through the hip as you're going up the steps. So it's sort of contracting it and holding it into a slightly shortened position. So then when you get into the saddle, and you do have a slight little flexion of the hip, but you're trying to lengthen the leg down and it just won't, because it's just not used to it. So that's where making sure that you're doing little bits and pieces, whether it be a couple times a week, really start to help it benefit long term. And it starts to go, oh, okay, this is the job and the role you want me to do. Because unfortunately, we can't not work and we can't not sit, and we have to do that. So we've got to try to work out that ratio between the two and go, okay, so where's that pivot point that's going to help us in the saddle and out of the saddle? And we tend to then see we get all these achy hips and tightness, and then you ride and then they get a bit achy and tight after as well, because they've just been overloaded and put into a position that they're just not used to. So it's really important to make sure that we're strengthening them that way. And then, sorry, I'll keep talking for hours, so you'll probably have to tap in and go stop.
I'm seriously thinking like you are the best guest ever. That's all that's going through my head. I just am watching the clock and I'm like, I wish we could talk all night. So keep it up. I love it.
Okay. So then we have the glute med. So if anyone wants a fun fact about me, the glute med is my favorite muscle in the body. And mainly because on most people, it's really weak and it can have a significant benefit and a significant improvement where you start to actually fire it and function it better. So quite often we'll have one side that's a little bit weaker than the other. Or I have had a couple riders, especially last week, I'll throw them under the bus and we go, well, they're both not that great, so let's work on both of them. And when I'm working with my riders, it's I try to make it fun, obviously. I don't try to pay them out like that too often, but they'll probably all chime in and be like, yes, you do. But it's trying to make it fun and lighthearted, but I still try to work both sides. So even if they've got a left side weakness, I still really make sure that I work the right side, because if we focus wholly and solely on one side, it starts to fire better. We're going to be a little bit at loss in a few weeks time, a few months time, where we have all this physiological change on one side and the other side's not doing anything. By all means, early acute stage rehab, we have to work on the side that is needing the rehabilitation. But when we're thinking and working with riders specifically on their body, we want it as symmetrical as possible. So we want to still make sure we're working both sides, even if one side is slightly weaker. It's still going to load up and the volume's going to be the same. So if one side's weaker, doing 10 reps of the squat, say, is going to still be really hard on that side. Your other side might find it a little bit easier. But what's really important if you're doing that is making sure the movement pattern is as symmetrical as possible. So that's where working with someone's really helpful, or having a mirror in wherever you're doing an exercise session. So as daunting as it can be, it gives you feedback. And that's what I reiterate to people with mirrors is, it's not about you looking at yourself in the reflection. It's about you looking at your anatomical features. How are you moving? Oh, I didn't realize my shoulder's dropping down as I'm squatting. I didn't realize I'm twisting. And that's where, if you can't quite work with someone, then that's a really good second best. Or if you've got a friend, have that open honesty of working with each other and going, watch what I'm doing as I'm moving. Are we doing the right thing together, and helping each other out? And it's great. Like, the more and more people see you, they know how you move without even thinking about it. And they go, oh, yeah, you've always dropped that shoulder. I didn't even realize. And I sit behind you in the car and your shoulders drop down, or whatever it might be. And then it sort of spiraled from there and you start to improve overall. Sorry, again, I completely digressed off that topic about the glute med, my favorite muscle. Sorry about that, guys. So it's a lovely little muscle that goes over the side of our pelvis here. So it helps with lateral pelvic stability. So the ability of the pelvis, sorry, I'm terrible with this whole backwards camera thing. The ability of the pelvis to balance itself laterally. So quite often what you might see in the saddle is the one side of the pelvis up slightly, one side down. You might struggle to get one seat bone deeper into the saddle. You'll see that sort of little bit of lopsidedness in the saddle. Or you might find you see a little twist, so one side is slightly more forward than the other. And usually that's due to a weakness in one side, in one of the glute meds. The other important factor that the glute med does is two other little important factors. It helps with abduction, so taking the leg away from the body, but also it helps with, and my little screw doesn't let me, it helps with internal hip rotation. So the ability for the femur to internally rotate in and out. Now, why that's important is, it also helps externally rotate the femur as well. So the posterior fibers externally rotate the femur out, and then the anterior fibers internally rotate the femur. Now, where that goes to be really important, and I might have to push my camera down to show you, is when we first sit on the horse, we open our legs up, we straddle around the horse's barrel. So we actually technically have to externally rotate our femurs outwards. From that position, and you can't quite see my toes, when I'm externally rotated like that, my knees are completely off and my toes are turned out. But what we actually know is that's not how we sit and we ride and we wrap that leg on. We then have to, from that externally rotated position, internally rotate the femur in. And so that then brings the leg on and wraps our whole leg around the horse. What we tend to do if we're a little bit weak through the stabilizers, through the lateral complex, is we're in that externally rotated position and our brain goes, bring your leg on. And so we grip with the knee. The knee and the thighs come on and the lower leg comes off. And all of a sudden we struggle with that wrapped sensation, or that wrapped ability to get the leg around the horse. And we are then, sorry, terrible air. We then are pinching with the knee, we're getting pushed up out of the saddle. So I use my analogy of a clothes peg. If we're gripping with the knees and the thighs too much, it's like having too many clothes on a washing line. The peg starts to pop up at the top. So we're pinching and we're pushing ourselves up out of the saddle, and we're again taking that lower leg off and lacking that ability to wrap get a better base of support, or a seat belt, as I call our lower leg, and we pop up out of the saddle a little bit more. So quite often that's where you have the riders that are struggling to get deeper into the saddle and get that lower leg wrapped, is we've got a bit too much pinching through the knee and the thigh and not enough engagement through our glutes, so our glute med and our glute max sometimes, and it's leading to that positional fault. So it's something I really try to reiterate with riders to start with, and build on from there. And there's some nice, easy, straightforward exercises to do, but you really want to make sure you're getting the correct muscle firing. So that's the big thing, is your body's obviously got to a point where that muscle might not be engaging as correctly as it should ought to. So you then going and doing an exercise that hopefully should help strengthen it isn't always going to benefit it, because it's had years and years of switching off and getting away with doing nothing. So all those accessory muscles that have taken over and compensated are probably going to engage. So that's where it's really important to initially make sure you're doing the right exercise for your body, because say a side leg raise might work for me, but it might not work for Kinsey. And then it might then be, we have to actually work in a squat or a single leg bridge for Jessa. So we have to do separate things to try to find what engages that muscle specifically for you. But it is always handy just to get started and get doing something and see if that benefits you, and you go, oh, I got better engagement, or I can feel that a bit more in the hip there. So they're some of my really big focuses, is if we start to get the seat a little bit more balanced, and as we even think about where you're doing, if you're sitting more balanced through your seat bones and you start in that position, and we know we put different weight distributions, if we're asking for canter, if we're asking for our laterals, all that sort of thing, we're using all the different weight shifts in our seat. But if we're starting from when we first hop in the saddle in neutral, in a balanced position, in symmetry, then we are able to move in and out of those positions, and we're giving our better communication to our horse than if we're starting with a little bit more weight in one side, and then we think we're balanced and we're giving the horse all these little conflicting communication aids as well. So if we can start off balanced, then we're able to move in and out of that position. As we know, we don't just stay fixed in the saddle. We actually move and mobilize with the horse. What our pelvis does is it dictates what the horse's pelvis does, and we're usually moving with the horse. And my other little analogy is sometimes it's the more we move with the horse, the less we actually look like we're moving. The more symmetry we have with the two external forces, the better we actually are overall. The more we look like Ingrid Klimke in the saddle, that's sort of where we really like to be.
Yeah. So you just mentioned that there's it depends on the person what exercises they should be doing to be strengthening those specific muscles. How do you know if the one that you're doing is doing that muscle that you're trying to target, or if it's the ancillary ancillary muscles that are chiming in and actually doing it instead of what you're targeting?
So a big thing I reiterate is touch feedback. So literally popping your hand on that area of your body and starting to give yourself, even if it's just light tapping, even if it's you just holding pressure against that area to feel the muscle engage, having someone highlight that. So with the glute med, it's right onto the side of your hip pocket, almost where you'd have sort of a little bit the side, if not around towards the back a little bit more. If you have your jean back pocket, that's sort of that area where you want to be able to palpate yourself a little bit. And if you're doing a side leg raise, you're doing a single leg bridge, you're doing crab walks, they're a really good one. They're a mean one, but they're a good one, is getting those muscles on that lateral aspect of your pelvis engaging and using that touch feedback. You're going to then know if that muscle's engaging or if it's not. You'll then start to feel what your body's doing. So say if you're doing a crab walk where you've got the band around your knees and you're in a squat position, you're walking sideways and you're feeling it all through the quadriceps, you're obviously then having a bit too much forward translation through the knee. Really think about pushing the bottom back and trying to get that different feel, and switch up and change the exercise and listen to what the body's telling you and go, oh, I'm not feeling it in that area. I'm feeling it in this area. I'm going to just shift my weight slightly. see if that changes the exercise. Use that as feedback and just have a little play as you're going through. More times than not, you're not going to be doing anything wrong. It's just we need to slightly tweak what you're doing, and then all of a sudden it can make a big difference. Even having your foot placed in a different position. So some people prefer to squat really straight through their feet. Other people, to get better glute engagement, I have to turn their toes out slightly. Some people I have to elevate their heels because their ankles won't allow them to move through there. So it's just tweaking it to find what works for you again. So just like what we said before about finding your modality, sometimes then when you found that and you're then working specifically onto your prescription of exercise, it's then finding little tweaks that then start to engage your muscles a bit better.
That's really interesting. And as you're describing that, I'm realizing that I also find it helpful, the touching where you're trying to engage, just from a perspective of like intentionality. Like I've had somebody put their hand between my shoulder blades before and be like, you're supposed to be feeling it here. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, now I can kind of like adjust and try to figure out how I can feel that muscle engaging. So that's really interesting. You gave us a few exercises that people could try for their glute meets specifically. You said the crab walk, the side leg raises, and the single leg bridge. Are there some exercises or dynamic mobility exercises, so either strengthening or dynamic mobility related exercises people could do for the tight hips or the pelvis weakness that you were describing?
Yeah, so I like to do like a kneeling position. So if you're like in a I call it proposal position, one knee up, one knee down, and you've got your hands either side of your leg that's forward, and you're just lunging forward into it and then relaxing back out of it. Lunging forward into it, relaxing back out of it. It's a good way to open up the hips. And then you can move that front leg that sets up into that proposal position to the side, and then you can slightly do a sideways sort of diagonal movement in and out, and that really helps open up the groin a little bit more. So they're two really good dynamic exercises I get to do. If you've got ability to kneel down on the ground, it might not always work, but I always like to have a little mat rolled up either in the shed or down by the stables or something like that. And so you can just roll it out on the floor, do it quickly before you hop on, or you just hop out of bed in the morning and you do that, or you get home from work in the afternoon just before you hop in the car to go see the horses, and you just do a couple of those stretches just to help open up after you've probably been sitting for hours on end. It can be just a great way to open up. And I love what you were just saying. And sometimes it's actually that awareness, so proprioception of those muscles, that ability to know where they are, what they're doing, and are they engaging, that can have the biggest benefit of all, as opposed to specific strengthening of it. So a lot of my riders might only get a chance to do a session once a week, and that's absolutely fine, because they're still working in that time on that mind-body connection. They're working on that proprioceptive response. Yes, while they might not be getting that long-term strength adaptations and things that we really want for that specificity, we're still targeting other areas. We're still getting benefit out of that. They're still having that 45 minutes, an hour, that they're focusing on them, and they're giving themselves that time to focus on themselves and their health. And quite often they get that benefit out of that because they're targeting those areas, and they go, oh, and then the next time they hop on the horse, they go, that's right, I worked with Tash with that yesterday. We were setting our shoulders, we were doing this out of the saddle. And they start to bring that into what that felt like in our session, and they start to think about that in the saddle. Or vice versa, if I've done a biomechanics assessment with them, I've got them off on the bed, we're doing all sorts of activations, and then we get them straight on the horse, we get that acute response. I haven't physiologically changed anything. I haven't waved a magic wand and suddenly they're stronger there, but they're much more aware of that body part. And then they get in and they get on the horse and they go, oh, right, okay, now I know what I wasn't activating and where might be letting me down. And then fatigue sort of starts to set in. That's absolutely fine as well. But then we get that glimpse of going, if we start to ignite that muscle a little bit more, long term, we're going to have much more better response, and then it flows on from there.
Absolutely. Just understanding like where the muscles are and how to activate them is like a huge piece of the puzzle. So I love that approach. Natasha, one thing that I've heard a lot about it like recently is cycle tracking. Is that something that you think that like like women, or I mean and men, I don't know, people should be doing? And well, I've heard that like, okay, my understanding is that women are on like a 30-day cycle and then men are on a 24-hour cycle. So like it could impact them in a different way. How should we be thinking about that? Is that something that's like a fad, or is that like something that we should be integrating into our routine?
Yeah, so again, going back onto technology in the phones, you've got that ability with your health trackers to track your cycles, so menstrual cycles and things like that. And what's really important to remember is we have peaks and troughs throughout that 28-day cycle. So for some people, you can cycle 21 days. Some people it can range up to like a lot longer. There's many different reasons behind that, but on average, it's a 28-day cycle. And usually around about day 15, we start to go into that luteal phase, and that's where we have hormonal changes, and there's all sorts of different things that go on without going too deep into it. But we start to have a big lull in energy, and there's all these different things that start to happen throughout the 28-day cycle. So tracking that and being on top of what you're doing there is really important to make sure that we're listening to our body and our energy systems, and knowing that there's going to be peaks and troughs. So as you said, men have that 24-hour response, and that's where they get the peaks and troughs throughout the day, and then they almost reset and go on from there. But we sort of have a high, and then we come down, and then we have a high again, and then we come down. So it's tracking along with that and making sure that we're fueling ourselves correctly. So that's a big thing as well. And that we're just understanding where we are throughout that cycle is I think really beneficial as well.
Will you talk about, that's really helpful. And as you were doing the hand motion of we go high, we go low, it's exactly how my life feels.
Yeah.
You mentioned fueling well. What are your kind of like high level tips for people nutritionally?
So a big thing I find is I personally have had a big benefit from making sure that I'm getting enough protein in my day. So so quite often will eat lunch and dinner with a really high protein source, and we tend not to have anything protein heavy in our breakfast. So when we think about first thing in the morning, as we've always said, it's a really important meal of the day where we start our day off. And quite often we'll have something that's a little bit carbohydrate heavy, whether it be a couple pieces of toast or a cereal, which is great, especially if you're getting a more low GI. But we're not tending to get any protein sources from that. So protein helps with so many different things, including muscle synthesis and being able to remodel and help with muscle development. But also it can help with satiety levels, so that hunger hormone. So quite often you'll eat brekkie, and then by like about 9 o'clock in the morning, you're starving. That's where you have another cup of coffee, and you probably have a muffin, all those sorts of things, which is absolutely fine. Treat yourself, but quite often it's because you're just a bit hungry, not so much that your body needs that fuel. So having a little bit of a protein source within your breakfast is helpful. So whether that be eggs on toast, whether that be, so I at the moment have a bit of porridge, and then I have a little bit of protein powder on top of my porridge. That just helps it. If you can eat your protein, it's always better. So if I mean that by having that as a natural source in your food, not by adding protein to it. But if you can't, by all means, don't go, oh, well, it's a little bit synthetic, whatever. Like making sure that you can get that in. And you tend to feel a lot less hungry, and you're fueling yourself with all the macronutrients as well. So it's really important to remember there's 4 main macronutrients. One of them is alcohol, so we probably won't talk about that so much, but we've got carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And it's really important that you're making sure that you're getting a balanced diet with all of those. So we have all these diets and things like that try to sacrifice one of those macronutrients, but we really do need all 3. And there's no beating around the bush. That's what we need in the long run, with making sure that we're sustaining a balanced and nutritious diet that then is providing us all of the different array of nutrients we need. So micro and macronutrients as well.
Yeah, that is, I mean, it's just so hard. I feel like it's so hard to get as much protein as you need. And I have recently like started to do, I mean, eggs in the morning, and it's just like, and then I'm on like the 5th morning in a row and I'm like, I can't eat eggs anymore. I
Yeah.
can't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Debbie is in chat and she's asking how, if you could tell her how her piriformis syndrome on the right side might be affecting her riding. She's saying, I do yoga after weeks of physical therapy and it's getting a lot better, but is there something that she should be doing to help?
So piriformis can get really tight, especially when the glute med is quite weak. So quite often we'll see, and quite often it depends, but we'll see the opposing glute med be weak, that then is loading the opposite piriformis up. Piriformis gets really tight. So the piriformis is nicknamed the pain in the butt muscle because it's a deep little muscle in the bottom that gets really quite tight. Sometimes then it gets quite tight and it runs through, the sciatic nerve runs through it. So then you can get some sciatic-like symptoms down the leg. So quite often the opposing hip is actually a little bit weaker and it's a compensation for that. Or sometimes the glute med on the side that the piriformitis is on is weak as well. So it's trying to develop that. So a good place to start would be definitely still doing your yoga, and that's excellent for that mobility and the flow. But then going, okay, are the structures a little bit weaker around there and they're loading up that piriformis constantly? So the big thing you look at as well is you go, well, why is this happening? Why is this repeating? Why is this a repeating offense? Why does it keep coming up? And usually there's other things that lead to that. So not just assessing and managing the area that's and the cause, so the symptom, going, well, what's causing that to happen, and looking at that. So we have to strip right back and look at your biomechanics, how you're walking, what the hip's doing. But quite often it will be because there's slight weakness somewhere else that then is compensating through that area. So that would be a big thing that I would do, is I'd be looking at that the opposing glute to start with and see if you need to strengthen that up and then build on from there.
And that's really helpful. Thank you. And thanks for the question, Debbie, and for being here. As you've been talking, I'm curious, in your work, how many of your clients are you working, like, are you able to see on a horse and assess the biomechanics and then take that back to the gym or your office or wherever you are doing additional work with them? How often are you pairing those things together? And I guess I guess we'll start there. I have a follow-up.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So I've got an array of different clients. So whether they be people that I see in person frequently or whether I see people online. So I've got a few clients that I see online. And so at the moment, I'm usually seeing them once a fortnight, once a month in the saddle, and then complementing that with a once a week session, or making sure that they've got their home program that they're doing, and I check in with them and making sure that they're on the right path with that. So usually that sort of is really great to have that really acute, intense work. And some riders I'm seeing every 6 to 8 weeks that I push it out a little bit further, and they're doing a little bit more self-management. They start to see improvements and changes, and they're working on that themselves. They're starting to get that adaptation. But it's the riders that I'm tending to see a little bit more frequently, so that fortnightly to monthly in the saddle, but then the weekly sessions that we're then going, okay, and them explaining to me what they've been working on in the saddle that week, what their coach has been working on with them. Because as I reiterate to them, I'm not a coach in regards to, I'm not replacing what you and your coach are working on with the performance outcomes of you and your horse. I'm here to help the rider's performance and work with your coach in order to improve the overall performance. So trying to really push that, going, well, what's the coach been telling you? What have you been working on? What have you been struggling with? And targeting that, programming around that, giving them specific things to work on in regards to that. One of my riders, she lives in New South Wales, so she's quite far away, and we do weekly one-on-one sessions, and then she and her partner and her groom join in and we do a group session. All online, but she'll give me constant feedback, constant videos throughout the week of what she's doing, how she's riding, and I just give her information and feedback, and we work on those things in our private sessions and really pinpoint that. So and that's had a big improvement on her riding, especially just in the last few weeks. We've really been able to work on something specifically and noticed a huge difference the last time she went out. So yeah.
That's so exciting. And of course, like everyone's ideal situation is have Natasha with them in person at least once a week and like seeing everything live. But also, a lot of people just feel kind of lost. And it's a feeling that I can relate to too. Even having all this information, it's like, but what do I do tomorrow and then next week? And like,
Yeah.
how do I know I'm doing it right? And there's the motivation factor and the accountability factor. All that said, are you able to take on clients that you have never met in person, or is the online opportunity something that is like you have to see them in person first? Are there any opportunities for people that you aren't able to see in person?
Yeah. So I've got some clients that I've never even met in person. So I've got a couple clients in America, and I've got a couple clients all around Australia. One of my riders is now based overseas. She's actually based with Lottie Fry. So she's over in the Netherlands. And I don't get to see them in person. Yes, okay, I've seen Lily in person. I've worked with her for the last 3 years, but I sort of know where she's at, but there's people I haven't actually met at all, and we've worked specifically off horse. We have been able to set up a few times where I can watch them ride, but they also send me videos and I can see things from the video. And we just meet online and we work through it and get them working that way. So there are many different options, and I think that's been one of the good things that's come out of especially COVID and things, is the technology base and the ability for us to benefit from that. Like in this situation, we probably would never have been able to set this up without that. So we go, okay, we're across the different continents, and we're able to do a recording, and it's really cool. So it's definitely something that I work with, and I don't have to see you in person. And quite often you'll start explaining something to me, and because I've personally had that in the saddle, or I've had about 30 different riders that have had that issue, it starts to then flow on from there, and it can really benefit from that rider perspective.
Absolutely. I think that's such an awesome opportunity for riders to be able to work with you, even if they don't live nearby you. I love that. If there was like and I know we've talked about a couple, but like one routine change that you wished all riders made, does anything come to mind? Like it could be anything from something that's out, like happens way long before they ride, they just do every day, or it could be something that they do like right before they get in the saddle. Anything that comes to mind for that?
Oh, okay. I guess it's very specific, isn't it? It depends on person to person, but as broad as this might be, it might just be a general mental check before you hop on, or even when you first sit in the saddle, and just going through a little bit of a body check and going, okay, where am I? What am I feeling today? Because each day you might find you feel a little bit different. So one day you might be really tight through your hip. One day your right ankle might be really tight, and just going through a little body check and going, okay, I've just got to wriggle that little area out. I've got to just take a deep breath, work on some breathing to help with that muscle relaxation. But just taking that 5 seconds maybe at the start of your ride to just go, all right, and think about your body is really important. Or yesterday, what I got with one of my riders to do is everything was going really, really well. And the horse was going fabulous into the contact. She was just riding really elastic. And I said, tell me what you're feeling right now when it feels right. And so she was explaining what her body was feeling and having that awareness. I said, okay, so we've got to try to then use that imagery to then take that on board when maybe it doesn't quite feel right, or when you're struggling, and going, okay, and having that mental check of going, okay, I'm warming up and I'm feeling like, and whether it even is just mentally going, okay, I'm in that position and I'm going to get on with my ride, and setting yourself up in that positive mindset, that might really help you. But knowing what it feels like when it's going well is really important. But if we haven't quite got that far and you don't know what it's like to feel well, that's where you go, okay, listen to your body when you first hop on. Go through what it's feeling and start to go, okay, I'm a little bit tight through this shoulder, or whatever it might be. So it's just that mental mind-body connection, and that little mindset to start your ride off.
Wow, I love that advice so much. I feel like that advice could be broader life advice too. Like when it feels great, what does it feel like, or what did you do to get there? And you can check in with that information. Well, like I said 30 minutes ago, I could and would love to talk to you all night because you are just a total wealth of information, clearly, but also your energy is, I mean, I'm at 5 p.m. my time, so usually it would be like, time to call it quits, but you have really re-energized me. So thank you for bringing that great energy to this conversation and for everything that you taught us tonight. And we are so incredibly excited to have your sessions and more information from you on the Ride IQ app.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Natasha, and thank you everyone who attended.